Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk ETC. So as you know, I try to bring you information about Ethereum Classic and related blockchain technologies. And today I'd like to bring to your attention another platform based on blockchain technology. And this is just to dispel the idea that Ethereum and Ethereum Classic are the only games in town, the only way that you could possibly design a blockchain platform. And so hopefully this will open your mind, give you some other ideas, perhaps even how to maybe improve Ethereum Classic and other people we could possibly partner with. But I have with me today Hank Stoever. He is a Blockstack developer for helping to advance the Blockstack system. So welcome, Hank.
Hi, Christian. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you start by kind of giving us an idea who you are, how you got involved with cryptocurrencies, maybe your education, your career, your job experience, and then how you got involved with Blockstack.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a software engineer, and I've followed a pretty typical software engineering career for about 7 years now. Worked at a couple different startups, doing all types of application development, web development, various different things. And I studied economics, so I've always been interested in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Not sure exactly when the first time I heard about it was, maybe roughly 2011, 2012, something like that. But it always stuck out to me as a really interesting idea and something that could potentially, have a big impact. And so I followed along, and I never really dove far into it, especially as a developer, because I've always, I just didn't see exactly how I fit into that world. I wasn't fully versed as, I'm not extremely knowledgeable on things like cryptography or networking, and so a lot of the low-level protocols that blockchains are really built on. So I followed it more as an outsider. Dabbled a little bit in trading here and there, just nothing serious, but just as an interesting thing. Actually built a Bitcoin cross-exchange arbitrage bot in around 2014, really just to kind of continue to learn how these things worked. And then, just continued with that passive interest until around the end of 2016, when I started to hear about the Ethereum platform and, this new concept to me about dApps, decentralized apps. And that immediately stuck with me. I really saw the value proposition that decentralized applications bring in terms of giving more control to the user, potentially more privacy, more data portability. And then especially myself as more of an application developer, I started to see how I could potentially contribute and fit into that world. Whether it was building tools to help with that or to even build the applications itself. And as a user, it was even really exciting to me. So, a lot in 2017, I started really digging deep into the world of smart contracts and, how exactly dApps work and decentralized storage and, learning about a lot of the different projects in the space. And then in early 2018, I launched my first decentralized app, which is called Numa. And it's kind of a social networking application that I built on top of Ethereum and IPFS. And that was kind of my, biggest way to dive in and actually see how everything works was by actually building something. So I launched that. And then soon after I did that, I got in contact with Blockstack, who I'd been pretty familiar with and was one of the other platforms that I'd been really interested in and seen great things about. And then soon after, we started talking, and I decided to join them to work on developer tools and growth efforts and overall building out that platform. So yeah, I've been at Blockstack since April of this year.
Okay. Now, I have to say that's impressive that you thought to make a social networking app, dApp, I guess is a proper term, on Ethereum, right? That's pretty ambitious. Try to compete with Facebook, of course. And so, yeah. And then you said that when you started out, you didn't know if you could join the club because of all the the knowledge, cryptography, networking, but then you seem to have overcome that fear. And I'm sure now you know a lot more about cryptography and networking. So I'm sure that's not an issue anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so just like me, I was impressed with personally, I was impressed with Bitcoin, and then Ethereum, and now Ethereum Classic. They just seem like more of the good stuff, right? You can
Yes.
Bitcoin 2.0, I believe some people call it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, now, and so you are more involved with Blockstack, but you also were a fan, maybe you still are, of Ethereum. But
Mm-hmm.
why don't you now kind of, for the people that aren't that familiar with Blockstack, why don't you kind of introduce the Blockstack platform for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Blockstack started out as actually a different project called One Name. They launched in 2014, and they were in the Y Combinator summer 2014 batch. And they were really tackling this idea of having a decentralized identity. So, that's why it was called One Name, because you had this one username that was basically stored on chain on the Bitcoin blockchain, and you could kind of associate a profile with that. And then, hopefully take that profile and use it in a lot of different applications as sort of a single sign-on and single identity
Mm-hmm.
sort of solution. They ran with that for a while, and then I think it was around early 2017, or maybe a little before that, that they changed the name to Blockstack and really approached a much bigger vision around building kind of an end-to-end system for building decentralized applications. So that's where we're mostly at today, which is we have, I think we solve two main pain points for dApp developers. One is identity, which I talked about a little bit, and another one is storage. So we still have a lot of the same approach with identity, where you register a username on chain, and then you can associate some profile data around that and prove ownership and stuff like that. And
Okay.
we've also introduced a storage system. So we call that Gaia, and it's a personal data store. So every user can run their own Gaia hub, is what we call it, or they can use a hosted one that a different service uses, and then even store or connect that that personal data store to an underlying storage layer, whether it's maybe an S3 bucket that you use, or Dropbox,
Okay.
or Google Drive. And then we've built SDKs that pull all of this in together for you, so that if you're building a web application or a mobile application, you just pull in our SDK, and all the authentication and storage implementations are boiled down to really easy to use APIs. And yeah, we help you build applications in that way.
Okay, so you just answered a question that I was wondering about. So when
Mhm.
I was researching, when I read the Blockstack website, and uh, what are the two founders' names?
Munib and Ryan.
Okay, so they got this idea to make Blockstack, and I just, in my mind, I couldn't understand how two guys would just decide, okay, I'm going to make a full blown general purpose blockchain platform. I mean, that's just so ambitious,
Mm,
but the way that you described it's so they first said, okay, let's get identity right, and
right.
that just in itself, that's useful. And then once that got off the ground, they added, so you said, storage, and so there's slowly adding to this useful core, so that, and then that made sense. It
Hmm.
wasn't just that they're going, it's not all or nothing, that they didn't stop, or they didn't wait till they had this full-blown general purpose platform. So there was always value, that, and the growing value, so that now it kind of makes sense how it started.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely.
And then, like, I've often thought, sometimes when I explain the potential of blockchains, I'll say that it's a shame we don't have digital passports, right?
Mm,
We all worry about losing the booklet when we're on travel. And so just what I'm saying is, just identity, just by itself, that's already enough to wrap a business around and spend years and years working on that. So I can see
agreed.
why that was, yeah, and then they're just adding more to that. So okay, and so you have this platform, and it's you can write applications on it,
Hmm.
dApps.
Hmm.
Now, why don't you explain then how it differs from, because most people that are hearing this are more familiar with the Ethereum Classic, architecture. So why don't you kind of
Yes.
describe it in opposition and comparison to that?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a very common question that people have. If people are familiar with decentralized applications, then they're probably familiar with Ethereum, and so one of the first questions is always how Blockstack is different. And the first thing that I jump to is that Blockstack in our current platform, we have no support for on-chain smart contracts. So there's a whole class of decentralized applications that really need a smart contract. One great example is like a token curated registry. This is something that where you kind of need some complex, trustless on-chain logic to be processed. And so, utilizing a smart contract platform like Ethereum Classic and Ethereum is probably something that you're going to need. And it's probably the same for a lot of maybe betting apps or gambling apps, things that are really financial in nature and need to have some financial logic built in. But I think there are a lot of decentralized applications that don't need smart contracts because they may need decentralized storage and decentralized identity, but they don't need an on-chain, complex Turing-complete language to be able to, utilize identity and storage. So a simple example would be, say you're building a social network, or maybe you're building just a Twitter type of application. Essentially, you really need to store a feed of messages that are created by people. So, there are some applications, even the application that I built, Numa, but a well-known one is Peepeth. Peepeth is an Ethereum-based social network. It's kind of a microblogging platform. And the way that it works is that first you sign in with your Ethereum profile, and then you create your message, which gets stored on IPFS, and then you have to pay a small fee to actually persist that IPFS hash, which is a reference to the data on chain, on Ethereum. And there's some benefits to that because then you actually get some permanence where the whole ledger is, permanent. It's, can never be overwritten. However, it's a lot more expensive. So if you don't need that permanence layer, then you can just skip the smart contract entirely and just utilize the identity and decentralized storage layer. So, I think if you're that kind of application, there's a lot that we can provide for you in a way that's much easier to use and faster to develop than maybe some other platforms.
So, all right. So, okay, there was a lot of things there. So let's see if I can
Yes.
unpack some of it. So
Yes.
your discussion about the social networking platforms using IPFS in addition to Ethereum or Ethereum Classic. So yes, not every part of an application needs the heavy duty security, cryptography, trustlessness, and so you can offload it to for example, get cheaper storage using IPFS. You wouldn't want to,
Right.
for example, have like a decentralized YouTube where you were paying to store videos on the blockchain. That would be
Right.
practical. So I'm okay with parts of an application being on a blockchain, but I wonder if you were being too hard on yourself or on Blockstack, because you're not, you can still write logic for Blockstack. It's just that it's not Turing complete. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on we have a very specialized form of on-chain logic that we use, which is really just around the authentication or identity layer, where you can make on-chain transactions to register a username or register a namespace, or transfer and make operations on that name. But it's just more limited at this time in terms of the on-chain layer. But you can still build completely complex applications. You're just not going to be using the Turing complete smart contract functionality.
Okay, so you can make complex applications, just not Turing complete applications. Is that correct then?
Well, you can write your web application in JavaScript, and that's obviously Turing complete. I just mean in terms of the on-chain abilities that you're able to do. If you wanted to do on-chain Turing complete things, then you would need to use Ethereum. or Ethereum Classic.
Oh, so you're taking advantage of this model that we were just talking about, that where, right, like the decentralized YouTube, you wouldn't put the whole app on the blockchain.
Exactly.
So Blockstack is good for the part that absolutely needs the blockchain, and it doesn't
Right.
try to be everything to everyone, because some things
Exactly.
just don't make. Okay, I understand. And so when people think of Blockstack, so should they be thinking of a networking with miners and lots of messages being passed between and things being duplicated on different computers?
There is, so we have what we call a virtual chain, which is actually built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So currently we don't even have our own blockchain with its own mining. We just utilize the security and global nature of Bitcoin. And we have this concept of a virtual chain where we utilize Bitcoin's op return field, where you can store some metadata in every transaction. We encode some data. So it's actually almost like a specialized smart contract in that way, where we just have a few operations that you can embed in a Bitcoin transaction to indicate the name operations that you want to use. But otherwise, when you think about Blockstack, it's really more about the tools that we provide for developers, especially around storage and personal data storage. Which is completely off chain.
Okay, so it sounds like who are the two guys that started it again? What's their names? Can you?
Ryan Shea and Munib Ali. Yes.
Okay, so they were careful to first focus on identity, and then they added storage, and so it sounds like they don't want to jump into trying to manage a whole network right now, but so they're intelligently leveraging the Bitcoin blockchain, and I presumably if blockchain took off, maybe there would be a need to eventually have their own blockchain.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually our plan. So later next year, we do plan on actually launching our own blockchain. And we have a few interesting ideas that we're going to use. We're following a protocol called proof of burn. And if you go to blockstack.org/papers, you can see our white papers that have been written. And we really go into this proof of burn mining system. But essentially, it actually uses the security and the high hash rate of Bitcoin for mining, while still providing our own chain with faster and cheaper blocks and more transaction throughput.
But that goes back to what you said earlier about you write information to the Bitcoin blockchain system, right? For security reasons. Okay. Yeah. So for people that don't know, you can write arbitrary text to the Bitcoin in a block. And so people, of course, innovative entrepreneurs have used that for all kinds of different applications. You could get the security of Bitcoin and then use it for something else besides a financial application. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great. And so can you give us some examples of some applications that are just, it's a match made in heaven that work great on the Blockstack system?
Yeah, we have a few dozen applications that have been built on Blockstack, and some really great ones. Mainly, if you want to look these up yourself, you can head to app.co/Blockstack, where app.co is a kind of decentralized app exploration platform that you can use. And we have apps across all different platforms, not just Blockstack, but also Ethereum and EOS and IPFS-based apps. But if you go to /Blockstack, you can see ours there. But I can highlight a few. One that I really like is Graphite Docs. It's basically a competitor to Google Docs and the whole G Suite, where you can make spreadsheets and text documents and even presentations. And so it's a web-based platform, and it uses Blockstack authentication and storage, so that when you use Graphite Docs, all of your data is encrypted on the client before it's ever stored anywhere. So not only is it much more private, but you get all these benefits of owning your own data, so that you never have to worry about a centralized party getting hacked and losing your data, or them shutting down and losing access to the data. And then also the privacy, where it's all encrypted on the client side, so no one can be snooping in on your data.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, another thing I noticed when I was researching Blockstack. So in Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, everything goes on the blockchain or on
Mm,
related support services. But
mhm.
with Blockstack, the model is that you keep your data locally, uh,
Right.
and encrypted, secure, and then you give permissions on exactly what and how you want to expose that data. So it was a different model. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so by default, it's actually not publicly visible to the entire world of, hey, I did this. Um, Now you can still build those type of applications. Say back to our social networking application, you would actually want to make sure you're broadcasting that so that other people know what you've created. But you do have a choice there. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Now, I'm a fan of Ethereum Classic, but I
Mhm.
just thought of a way that Blockstack could be even more successful. I mean, who am I? But the first thought that came to my mind is that you have the identity infrastructure, you have the storage. It perhaps the way that they could compete would be if it was much easier. I think the ease of use is going to be huge, right? How fast can an application, a developer, an entrepreneur just swoop in, use really nice APIs, and have a DApp ready to go? I think that's probably would be attractive.
You're absolutely right. The success of this platform is really based on, the quality of developers and the ease of development that we can do exactly what you're saying. So, that's our main focus is to make tools that developers and entrepreneurs find easy to use. Because if they can make great applications, then we believe that the users will, be attracted to those applications, and it'll be a self-sustaining cycle in that way.
Right. And then, I mean, as much as I love blockchains and cryptography, if you could even make it almost so that the developer almost doesn't even have to know that they're using a blockchain,
Mhm,
if it was just a few little tweaks to their JavaScript code,
mhm.
so yeah, that I could see that would be very compelling.
That's absolutely true, and we actually that's kind of where we are today. Where if for the majority of applications built on Blockstack, you don't actually have to touch the blockchain ever because the identity portion goes through where a user uses our application we call the Blockstack browser, which is kind of a wallet, and it allows you to actually register your username on chain. And then we try and make that process for the end user as easy as possible as well, by giving you a way of making what we call a sponsored username or like a sponsored subdomain. So if you're a Blockstack user and you want to buy the username, um, for example, hank.id, then you're going to have to pay some Bitcoin to actually register that. And we have these decentralized rules around how much you have to pay. You actually have to pay more if it's a shorter username that's more desirable and less for a longer username.
Mhm.
But we know that most users aren't going to be able to buy Bitcoin and figure out, how to use an exchange and then transfer it to your wallet and then finally be able to pay for the username. So what
Mhm.
we actually do is provide sponsored subdomains where, for free, you can register a username in the format of, basically your name.blockstack.id. And you don't need any Bitcoin. You don't need to really understand how the blockchain works at all. We actually pay for the registration of that username, and
Mhm.
we actually batch all those subdomain registrations into a single transaction to make it even cheaper on our side.
Okay, so yeah, that goes to the theme of making it as easy as possible for new users. Now, I was curious about one thing. When I saw that you have your own special browser, I thought so. Uh, Technically, that's no big deal, but if you wanted to make it even easier, I'm curious why you didn't just make an extension to like Chrome or Firefox so that people could use what they're even more familiar with.
Yes, yes. It's actually a really, really good point, something that we've been thinking about a lot. And actually, part of the problem is a little bit around the name of it. We call it the Blockstack browser, but it's actually it's not exactly a full web browser. It's actually kind of a web server that runs locally on your machine. And then you do actually use it through Chrome or whatever your default browser is. So even that naming portion alone makes it a little bit more confusing. But we actually are doing some work right now to explore building a Chrome extension and potentially even native mobile applications to make it even more sort of built into the flow that you're used to. Especially if you use something like perhaps MetaMask or other Ethereum-based Chrome wallet extensions, then it should be just like that.
Okay, and so you said there's a little mini web server that's involved. So that's basically the proto. That's like the equivalent of an Ethereum or Ethereum Classic client that you're
Yes.
running to manage your information. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
that's a good analogy.
Okay, and then you've already shared that in the future they might move from their virtual blockchain on Bitcoin to their own separate blockchain. Why don't you kind of talk about other uh, goals, other plans for the future, and even if there's any issues that you guys are trying to address, why don't you kind of talk about that too? Good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So some things coming up in the future. Very soon, actually, we're going to be launching our token. And this is a token built actually on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So very similar to how ERC20 tokens are built into the Ethereum and Ethereum Classic blockchain. We have a token that's being launched on Bitcoin, similarly using embedded data in the Bitcoin transaction. And we did our ICO for that last year. And so we're really excited to be launching that very shortly here. And you'll be able to use that token to do the same name registrations and operations that we've been supporting, but hopefully even cheaper and potentially faster. So that's one thing. Another exciting area is we're doing some experiments around how we fund or support applications that people are developing on Blockstack. So we're doing a pilot program that's going on right now, where if you've built an application on top of Blockstack, we have a couple third-party reviewers that are sort of trusted but unaffiliated people in sort of the same space that do their own reviews, sometimes community aggregated reviews on the applications. And then we determine those aggregate reviews to actually pay out all the different applications out of a certain pot every month. So we're still figuring out exactly those details, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to use this mechanism to support some of the best apps with, potentially a few thousand or even higher than that dollars a month to be able to support them to, go full time or continue to commit to their Blockstack applications.
Right.
And in terms of concerns, I think that sort of blends into it. I think this entire industry is still in a phase where we're proving the true utility of decentralized applications. Whether it's apps built on Ethereum or Blockstack or even the newer applications like EOS. I think there's still a bit of proving to be done of whether any of them will be able to break through into the mainstream. Will people really utilize this privacy and ownership of data? And will we be able to make it in a way that's as usable as an Instagram or a Facebook, or other mainstream apps? I think we still need to prove that. And so, I'm excited to see. I think that the industry is going to continue to grow. I think in the next year or two, we're going to see some amazing decentralized applications that start to prove that. But I think we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we're all kind of struggling with that. Like, how do we get the grandma to be
Yes.
using blockchain technology?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we make it easy enough? Yeah. And it sounds like you guys are on the right track. Like we were talking about, maybe making it so nice that developers and users aren't even aware that they're using blockchain technology under the hood. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So good stuff. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So there you have it. There's just to open your mind. There's another blockchain platform with different sets, different design decisions, different ideas going into it. And so yes. So thank you, Hank, for describing Blockstack with us. And did we cover everything, or is there anything else you want to say before we close?
One point is that I don't want people to think that these are totally mutually exclusive platforms. It's totally possible to use Ethereum Classic with a smart contract to store certain data, and then use Blockstack for your authentication and storing, bigger data like images and stuff like that. I think there's a lot to be learned from some symbiosis across these projects, and I think, we could even at Blockstack do a good job of helping promote that sort of cross-pollination to just make the best applications possible.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it's not that you do everything on one or everything on the other, but they could help each other. If you like one service on Blockstack, it could benefit your Ethereum Classic or Ethereum dApp.
I think so.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that point. I think that was an important point to make. So, all right. And so once again, thank you. Thank you for spending time, explaining that. And I wish you well with your efforts.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was an awesome conversation. I think you had some great ideas, and yeah, I'm excited to see the future.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.